Hey everyone, welcome back to Thought Crime and Keto and Crime. Today we are going into part 3, final part of the West Memphis 3. And I don't know, you can tell by, for those of you watching on video, I'm sure you can tell that I filmed these one right after the other. You can tell because my hair is getting progressively flatter. And I'm sure my butt's getting fatter because I need to get up and exercise. But anyway, let's get into the final part. Today we're going to talk about the trials. There were 2 trials. And we're going to talk about the appeals and all of the hullabaloo afterwards and where these men are today. So, let's get into it, shall we? We left off last time with all of the different aspects to the investigation, as well as the charges levied against all 3 of the major suspects, as well as the suspects that were kind of eliminated for one reason or another. Also, there will be another part to this, a supplement, a bonus coming out later. I don't know exactly when it'll be. We've got to get some things scheduled, but my good friend Dan Whitehurst, stand-up comedian and retired police detective, Nashville police detective, is going to come on and give me his take on this investigation, what his opinion is, if he thinks these guys are guilty or not, as well as what the police did right versus what the police did wrong. There's a lot of controversy about what went right versus what went wrong with the investigation. So rather than just me, some, opinionated person on the internet giving their take on it, I want to hear what a real police detective has to say about it. So I thought you might find that interesting. That will be coming out at some point. However, Sunday we will be moving on to a white-collar crime case, just to cleanse our palates a little bit before we get back into murder and such as that. So anyway, let's get on to the trial of Jessie Misskelley Jr. He was tried separately from the other 2 because of something called the Bruton Rule, which mainly says that because he confessed, remember he had that 12-hour interrogation, that he confessed to these crimes and gave just a sporadic account of what happened that day. The times kept changing. One time he would say it was at 9 a.m., then he would say it was at night. He couldn't really point out the pictures of the boys, even though I know that that's kind of understandable. So there was that confession, and then later on he confessed twice to his lawyers. The story changed between the first confession and those 2, and then later on in the back of a squad car being moved from court back to prison, or back to jail where he was being held, he confessed again. So, and again, that story was different from the others. So there was a lot of inconsistencies in those stories, and because of that, and because he implicated the other 2, he could not be tried with them because his confessions were not admissible in the trials of Damien, Echols, and Jason Baldwin. They were only applicable to his case. Now, because of all of the press coverage and a highly opinionated, hot discussion going on about these cases, the trials were moved out of West Memphis to another venue to try to maintain jury purity, although that would later come out in appeals that didn't exactly happen because of the nationwide coverage. It's hard for people with... That's the reason I think I am truly a believer in freedom of the press. And I like to know things. But I think while the trial is going on, press involvement should definitely be limited because it inhibits a person's ability to get a fair trial. Because in this country, we are innocent until proven guilty, not the other way around. It is the state's or the prosecutor's responsibility to prove somebody guilty beyond one reasonable doubt in most cases. So it's not up to the defense to prove themselves innocent. It's just up to them to prove that the state or the prosecutor doesn't really have a case. They only have to throw up one reasonable doubt, and they have to be found not guilty. So I think when there's a lot of coverage around a case, that it really limits a defendant's ability to get a fair trial. So I would like to see, outside of straight court TV, maybe where you're allowed to, when the trial is actually going on, and you're allowed to watch it and it's not written, everybody's kept sequestered, I'm okay with that. But I'm not okay with the opinion pieces and all the hubbub around the trial during the investigation, which is, at that point, you're tainting a jury pool. I would like to see just a report of what happened, maybe later on who's been arrested, and beyond that, complete silence until the trial begins. And if they want to do a live feed of the trial, such as happened with O.J. Simpson, I'm fine with that, because at that point the jury has been selected, they're sequestered, they're not hearing any opinions, they're just hearing facts. So that's what I would like to see happen. But these guys, as far as getting a fair trial, didn't really have a chance, and that goes for a lot of defendants. So that's just my 2 cents. But because of the Bruton rule, they had to be tried separately. So you had Misskelley tried in January, February of 1994. And then you had, starting in March, the trial of Damien Echols and Jason Baldwin. During Misskelley's trial, they relied heavily on his confessions. That was their main source of prosecuting him. The defense brought in Richard Offshee, who is a professor of sociology at Berkeley and has written several books. He's an expert on false confessions derived through coercion. And he said that because of the way the stories changed from time to time, and the fact that Jessie Misskelley Jr. had a lower IQ, they really believed that he had been led into these confessions, that there was a lot of pressure on the West Memphis, Arkansas Police Department, and the fact that there was so much wrong with the investigation. There was so many mistakes made during the investigation. There was so many other possible suspects that hadn't really been taken into consideration, that they were simply basing their entire case off what seemed to be a false confession from this lower IQ gentleman. Now, there were lots of other evidence presented, but that was their main case. And also because during one of his confessions, he said that Damien Echols had raped the boys. They were presenting evidence because the backside, the anal cavity of all the boys were dilated. That was their only evidence of any kind of sexual molestation for these boys. But because he said that there was sexual molestation, they were trying to say that that was proof that what he said in those confessions was correct. However, another expert on what happens to the body after death, the mortician, did testify that dilation of the anus is normal during rigor mortis and the post-mortem tread to decay. So that didn't really hold water. That did not prove sexual molestation. There was no other evidence of sexual molestation that was found, although the fact they were in the water for several hours could have washed it away. That was also brought up. Now, the defense did not work. He was found guilty, 1 count of first-degree murder, 2 counts of second-degree murder. Even though in all his confessions he said he was only holding the boys, he didn't actually hurt anyone, they still sentenced him to 3 charges to 40 years in prison. All of his appeals were struck down. So that's Jessie Misskelley Jr. Next, you have the trials of Damien Echols and Jason Baldwin that started in early March. This trial, because the confessions of Misskelley were not admissible because of the Bruton rule, they relied heavily on evidence that was supposedly gathered in the crime scene as well as eyewitness accounts. And mainly they centered in on satanic connections, that these boys did this in a ritualistic killing. Remember Vicki Hutchinson, she testified. There was relatives of Damien's ex-girlfriend that testified, saying that she saw Damien out that night covered in mud, though that was never substantiated. No muddy clothes were ever found. And mainly they concentrated on the testimony of Dale W. Grievous. He was a graduate of Columbia Pacific University. Now, I researched Columbia Pacific University to see if what they said was true. It is, in fact, it's closed. It's no longer in existence, but it was a distance learning program not even online, just like mail order, distance learning. That it was an unaccredited school. It was started when it was started. It had a temporary accreditation, then lost it. It later was brought up on charges of giving people credits toward degrees for life experiences. They gave somebody credit for a dance class, dance by mail order, a dance class because she sent in a VHS tape of her dancing. They also awarded a PhD in Spanish to someone that couldn't speak Spanish. I mean, I researched just a lot of weirdness. So they were relying on him, and he had a PhD in like cult activities.
How were you accepted into enrollment at Columbia Pacific University?
I had to fill out a considerable series of papers, including all my education, background, experience.
Did you ever fill out a little flyer like this
No, sir.
that says, call toll-free for information on how to become a doctor? This is a mail-order college, isn't it? What classes did you take between 1980 and 1982 to obtain your master's degree? What
I
classes?
testified.
I'm asking,
Yeah.
what classes? What classes did you take?
I told you, I answered that before, none.
You did not take any classes. Between 1982 and 1984, when you became a PhD, what classes did you take?
So he basically was basing his entire case on the fact that there were bite marks on the children. One of them's groin area had been mutilated, and that there were the fact they were tied, and just weird stuff. And so the defense basically brought out that he didn't really have any credentials, that his school really didn't have a right to award any credentials, and the fact that the bites and the mutilation were later proven to possibly be from snapping turtles that were in the water. And I'll insert a clip here of snapping turtles. That they were the one that most of the mutilation to the body happened post-mortem as a result of wildlife in the water. Also, this is where we learn why Damien changed his name.
The court?
Damien Wayne Echols.
Why did you change your name?
I was very involved in the Catholic Church, and we were going over different names of the saints. St. Michael's was where I went to church at. And we heard about this guy from the Hawaiian Islands, Father Damien, that took care of lepers until he finally caught the disease himself and died.
They also questioned him about an interest in the occult, namely interest in the works of Aleister Crowley. Remember that he was the guy that started the Church of Thelma, that wrote the Book of Laws, that really talked about human sacrifice, drinking blood, that sort of thing. And Damien said that he only heard of him from books he had read and on television, and then he was questioned about something he had written while he was in jail waiting trial. It was a list of people's names. It was his name, his parents' name, his ex-girlfriend Dominitier's name, who had just given birth to his son. He found out that she was pregnant while he was in custody. She gave birth to the child just before the trial, so they were questioning how he already knew his son's name and had written that down, and then why he had also written Aleister Crowley's name down. And he had this to say.
Now, let me refer you back to your statement that you gave Officer Ridge. Did you tell him in that statement that you had been a member of a white witch group for 5 years?
No,
Okay.
I've never been a member of any group.
And so if he put that in his report, you're saying that's inaccurate.
Yes, I am.
He made that up.
Yes, I am.
With a fellow named Aleister Crowley.
I know who
Heard of
he
him?
is. I know who
Okay.
he is.
And he's a guy who kind of professes, he's a noted author in the field of satanic worship, right?
I know he is, but I've never saw any of his books personally.
Not really much of a follower of his?
I would have read them if I would have saw him, but I just
Okay.
never.
Okay. But Aleister Crowley is a guy that, based on his writings, believes in human sacrifice, doesn't he?
He also believed he was God, though.
Aleister Crowley doesn't have any particular significance to you?
I know who he is. I've read a little bit about him, but I've never read anything by him.
Let me show you a copy of...
It was this paper I had on different alphabets for like translations where you could write things that nobody could read, and this was one of the forms.
Oh, okay. Well, where did you have that at? When did you do that?
All right, so all of that to me is perfectly explainable, but then again, who knows? But the whole end result of this is they were both found guilty. Echols was considered the ringleader, was sentenced to death. Baldwin to life in prison with no parole. From 1994 to 2007, there was appeal after appeal by both sides' attorneys. James Baldwin and Jessie Misskelley ended up in the same prison for a while. Misskelley kind of kept to himself, where Jason Baldwin worked in the library. He read a lot. He delivered books to the prisoners in their cells, particularly the ones on death row. He got to see Damien one time after a brief prison transfer, but not a lot. Damien kind of living on death row. All the death row inmates in Arkansas were kept in one prison, and while he was on death row, he talked to a lot of prisoners, learned their stories, all the time contesting his innocence, and began to kind of get heavily into Eastern religion. He started reading the works of a Buddhist monk. He started to practice meditation and Reiki and other things, just trying to kind of prepare himself for what he thought would be his death at some point. So, in the meantime, you had people outside, in addition to his attorneys, taking up their cause. The attorneys were filing appeal after appeal based on all of the mistakes that they considered had happened during the investigation, such as the bodies being removed from the water before the coroner arrived, that they had already begun to decay on the riverbank before the coroner got a chance to examine them, the fact that the only evidence of sexual molestation was normal dilation of the anus, the fact that the turtles were the ones that probably caused the mutilation to the body, and the fact that officials never really drained the creek in a timely manner to get any evidence that might be there, because they later found clothes. They didn't find 2 pairs of underwear, and they believed that was evidence of sexual molestation, but again, no other evidence was found. It is quite possible it was washed away by the water. And later on, a hair was found in one of the boys' shoelaces, the ones that were used to tie him up. It was tied in there, and it turned out to probably with a 98% certainty to belong to Terry Hobbs. Also, there was a hair that was tested that probably came from an African American that was found on some of the clothing of the boys. Again, there's the Mr. Bojangles connection, but as we remember, the evidence was lost from those blood scrapings, so there was no way to test for DNA. In 1996, the first of 3 HBO documentaries that were made by Lord of the Rings director Peter Jackson in connection with Johnny Depp, Natalie of the Dixie Chicks. A lot of celebrities took up the West Memphis Three's causes. They said believed they were targeted because they were just different from the people of West Memphis. In addition, new evidence, such as the fact that John Mark Byers had a knife, a pocket knife, that after it was tested, after the trial, revealed that it had both his and Chris Byers, the little boy that was murdered's, blood on it. Also, there were a couple of sets of human bite marks found on Chris Byers' body. And mysteriously in 1997, John Mark Byers, his father, had all of his teeth pulled and got dentures. So he had an entirely different bite, and there was no way to test that. You also had Vicky Hutchison coming forward saying she was coerced by police to give the testimony and the information that she gave. You also had her son Aaron saying that he felt he was misled and coerced. You had Stevie Branch's mom, Pam Hobbs, could not find, after she was allowed to look at Stevie's possessions, could not find the pocket knife that his grandfather had given him that he carried everywhere. And she figured it either washed away or whoever killed him had taken it. Well, later on, she found it in Terry Hobbs' nightstand while cleaning. So that led her to believe maybe her husband, who really wasn't questioned, knew more than he was letting on. Then her daughter actually told her that she had witnessed Terry coming home the day after the bodies were found and washing his clothes, all the clothes and linens in Stevie's room, as well as the curtains. So it was just strange behavior. They would eventually divorce. Whereas John Mark Byers, Chris Byers' mom, would later be found dead of mysterious causes in their home. So just a lot of weirdness. The documentaries brought all of this out. Also, Kent Arnold, who is the jury foreman on the Echols Baldwin trial, confessed that he had been receiving information from a district attorney prior to the beginning of deliberations, and he actually introduced evidence in the jury room that should not have been there because it was inadmissible in the trial, and a lot of that was used to come up with the guilty verdicts. After a push, after all of the nonprofits coming out, Free the West Memphis Tree, you also had John Mark Byers and Pam Hobbs coming forth to finally say they didn't believe that these three killed their children. The only parents and relatives within the victims that believe the West Memphis Three actually did it are the family of Michael Moore. They contend to this day that they had the correct people. But everybody else kind of recanted and realized there was probably another perpetrator out there. In fact, Natalie from the Dixie Chicks actually said that perhaps we should take a better look at Terry Hobbs because he really wasn't questioned, and he ended up suing her for libel and defamation, though she didn't win the case because she didn't really accuse him of anything. She just said we need to look at him more. And he lost the case and ended up having to pay her court costs. So there was also some strange behavior by Hobbs and Byers during the documentaries. One of them was shooting things, saying that was Damien. Just weird behavior, but all of it could be chalked up to just being, a grieving parent too. But still, we can't overlook the hair, the two hairs that were found, although the Hobbs hair could potentially just be because the boys spent a lot of time in each other's houses. But because the only alibi that Hobbs and David Jacoby had was that they were out looking for the boys, and several people from the Robin Hood Hills housing development said that they saw the boys ride toward Terry Hobbs after he called them, and that's the last time anybody saw them alive. So there was just some spookiness there. Finally, the Arkansas Supreme Court, on the backs of the huge public outcry, ordered new trials 2010. But rather than go through the expense of another trial, DAs really said they believed they had the right people. They offered them a plea deal on August 19th, 2011, where they were allowed to use an Alford plea, which is a strange beast. But basically, you plead guilty but maintain your innocence. So it's a way of you maintaining your innocence while the state still gets their conviction. And all three of them ended up taking that plea. Jason Baldwin at first, because it was his desire to come out and become an attorney, and he knew he would never be able to become an attorney with a guilty conviction on him, wasn't going to do it. But later on, he recanted. All three of them pled guilty by maintaining their innocence and were released from prison. And that's where we stand today. The West Memphis Three is free. Jason and Damien have gone on to do lots of interviews. They've consulted on the movie West of Memphis. They've consulted on several books. They've done tons of interviews. They've kind of made a living off of their conviction. And there's been a lot of outcry, hey, part of an Alford plea is you're not allowed to do that. But the recant to that is they're not making a living off the murder of these boys. They're making a living off the fact that they were falsely convicted. Now, I'm not going to put an opinion out here. I don't know. Maybe after I talk to Dan, I'll have more of a opinion. But right now, I don't know. I think there's good evidence for and against them. But I don't want to see anybody falsely convicted. But I think out of all the three, only Misskelley, he went back to West Memphis, and that's where he lives. He's only given one interview, and it was very brief. He just said he didn't want anything to do with it. He basically does odd jobs and lives off about $500 to $700 a month he gets from West Memphis, 3 nonprofits that send him money. But other than that, he's kind of back to living a very life on the edge of poverty, just like he was before. He and his dad kind of worked together and lived together, and he kind of stays away from the other two, whereas Baldwin and Echols have made a life for themselves as movie producers, movie consultants. They travel a lot. Baldwin lives on the West Coast. Damien Echols actually started a alternative religious center in Salem, Massachusetts. He and his new wife, who he met while in prison, she was somebody that worked to try to help get him released. They moved to Salem, Massachusetts. Yes, home to the Salem witch trials. I did a video on the Salem witch trials. I'll link it here if you're interested. But they moved there. He opened up kind of an alternative religious Buddhist type shop and runs that. He also has a website, and they travel a lot. I actually reached out to him to see if he might be willing to give me 5 or 10 minutes. Didn't hear back, but if he does respond, I'll be happy to put that up. I hope he does. Anyway, that's where it stands. Where do you stand? Let me know below. What do you think? Really interested to hear into what you have to say. Do you think they're innocent? Do you think they're guilty? Do you think one of them's guilty, the others are innocent, vice versa? Let me know. But I really want to leave you with this. It's fine that the West Memphis 3 got their day in the sun, what have you, but we have forgotten about Michael Moore, Stevie Branch, and Chris Byers. They were 8 or 9 years old, and they lost their lives. So just take a moment and remember that they are the real victims of this. And my thoughts go out to their family. I'm not a religious person, but I do try to send as many positive vibes out as I can. I don't know if I really believe in that, but that's really all I can do, is to say that that's where our greatest sympathies and empathy should lie, is with the family of the victims. And with that, I will end my coverage of the West Memphis 3. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I will be back soon with another true crime case. Like, comment, subscribe. I'll also be back with my bonus interview with retired detective Dan Whitehurst, and I will see you soon. Keto Comic, out.